All right, good morning, everyone. I guess this is Taming the Cloud and More Tales from the Wild, Wild West and the New Data Frontier, take 2. So I'm on, we're live. Anyway, one of the areas before we get started, I noticed is I finally found what it's like to be 6'4", sitting up on this podium. You know, being vertically challenged at 5'8", you don't see these types of heights before. So it's great to look over people's heads for once, rather than look at their shoulders. So it's a great opportunity for me. So thank you for this very high platform. I feel really good now. Maybe I should try out for the Kings. Anyway, moving forward, thanks for coming into this session. You know, we have a great session with some esteemed speakers that really want to talk about taming the cloud. And obviously, in my role, cloud is very important to us at the Department of Technology, on how we're addressing cloud, what we're looking at from a hybrid cloud perspective, and what are the steps that lie ahead in terms of aligning IT with the needs of the business. So these very prestigious panelists, I think, are going to give their perspective on the cloud. So before we get started, how many of you recognize the music? All right, where's that from? This gentleman right here? Gunsmoke. Yeah, exactly. So you guys are a lot older than I am. See? So I'm trying to keep it real here. Anyway, I prefer Guns N' Roses, but I guess, you know, Gunsmoke is better. So anyway, what we wanted to do is really provide a short announcement and introduce the panelists from left to right. I have Tim Garza. Tim Garza is the IT director and what I call Chief Agency Information Officer at the California Natural Resources Agency. Tim, would you like to say a few things about yourself before we get started?
Just basically that the resource agency has 33 departments, and the hybrid cloud model is critical to our future alignment to how we deliver services to our business. We're looking forward to some of the stuff that Chris and OTEC's doing. We've been partnering with them and some cloud providers, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through.
Great. Thank you, Tim, and we'll look forward to hearing from you on that perspective. Next up, we have Chris von Wagoner. Chris is the Chief Strategy Officer for Commvault. And so obviously Commvault plays a big role in protecting and securing the state's technology infrastructure. So Chris?
Thank you, Chris. Chris von Wagoner, Chief Strategy Officer for Commvault. For those of you who may or may not know who Commvault is, we are a data and information management company specializing in backup, recovery, archive, as well as managing your data both on-premise in a hybrid cloud as well as public cloud. So we'll get a little bit into more use cases and how we help people move to the cloud, migrate, as well as run in the cloud.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And last but not least, of course, we have John Walton. John serves as the Chief Information Officer for the County of San Mateo. So, John?
Thanks, Chris. Well, first, I just want to lodge a complaint that we didn't use the theme music to The Big Valley, which I think is far superior to Gunsmoke. Launched the career of Lee Majors, 65 to 69, for those of you that are my age group, so I'm just saying Gunsmoke was a poor choice to kick this off. I think we're off to a bad start. But having said that, I'm the CIO for San Mateo County. Cloud is very important to us because we had a lot of aging infrastructure, and so you know, I'm fortunate to work for an organization that really had already, I think, emotionally and from a business sense embraced the attitude of looking at new ways of doing things and have rapidly deployed a lot of our applications. We were the first California county to go live on Workday for payroll and HR in the cloud. And you know, our strategy for how we manage our data now in the cloud is becoming more and more relevant to where we're going in the future when it comes to big data analytics and cross-platform integration. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. I hope there's more conversation than presentation because I'm not much of a presenter.
Well, you sound pretty articulate, so you could have fooled me. And those that don't know me, I'm Chris Cruz. I'm the Chief Deputy Director of Operations of the California Technology Office, and I'm also the executive sponsor for the Emerging Technologies Forum. So thanks again for coming. So really we want to dig right down into the meat of the conversation and Tim, I'm going to start with you, is talk to us about really where you see the vision of cloud going and how from your department and organization and agency perspective you see utilizing cloud services moving forward.
We really think that we don't even talk about cloud. We talk about workload placement. And really, in order for us to keep up with the business demands and also with the velocity of change, we really have to look at how we place workload and how we deliver services. So basically, It's very critical that we understand what that workload is and where we can take advantage of different cloud offerings, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, software as a service. These all have different characteristics. So we don't view the cloud as a single solution. We really view it as a hybrid approach to where we place workload. And is that workload critical? Is it sensitive? Is it confidential? What level of security does certain data sets need? So we really take a look at it from an individual workload. We also look at things is, do we care? Can we deliver the service better than the cloud provider? If not, why don't we go ahead and let our business consumerize that? But we do want to do it in a secure mannerism. We do also want to do it very transparently. So it is a critical part of our architecture direction, but more importantly, it's a critical part of our business strategies.
Great. So Chris, from an industry perspective, talk to us about what Commvault has in mind for cloud, how you integrate your services and solution into cloud objectives.
So Commvault has been around for 20 years, and I've been working there for 20 years. So I've seen a lot of changes. I mean, when I started, SAN and NAS were just kind of ideas that people were kicking around, and seeing the changes that have gone in the industry. And so our approach has always been that, there's been a lot of promises made in terms of what cloud will deliver, and I don't want to get into a big long-winded discussion of how you define it, because everybody has a different, I think, definition in the room. But to deliver the promise of cloud requires a couple of things that I don't think everybody kind of realizes. First of all is, how do you get a workload from wherever it is, once you've made that decision, to where you want it to land? So, and it's just not as easy as picking things up and lifting and shifting them. Secondarily, not all clouds are the same, to your point. The delivery, the resiliency, the capabilities with them vary wildly, even within vendor data centers. So understanding really the details of it. And thirdly, finally, and I keep talking to people about it, you need to consider architecturally, strategically, is there an off-ramp to this? Or am I just trading another lock-in infrastructure for one that I've got today? So the ability to provide portability between these environments, I think, is a critical thing that people need to think about.
Great, thank you. Obviously, last but not least, John, you have the county perspective for cloud. I'm interested in getting your perspective as well and vision.
Well, I think Chris and Tim pretty much touched on all the things we think about. I think, I sat in on a little bit of the previous session. In our county, at least, and I think in some governments, there was this sort of yin and yang of fear of the cloud versus rushing to the cloud. And I think one of the important things is finding a balance, really thinking through the business objectives of your organization and thinking about, well, where does it make sense? I mean, you can run something here, you can run it there. It's typically what we find now is it's not so much of a technical challenge like it was maybe 10 or 15 years ago, where some of the cloud technologies or infrastructure as a service or application as a service were still evolving. So I think, Microsoft and Amazon and a lot of those leaders in the industry have really helped develop it to the point where a lot of things can be done in either or situation. But I think you have to take into consideration, that the real total cost of ownership on one hand of CapEx versus OpEx. And we've always defaulted in local government to front-loading projects, building up our own internal infrastructure because we had capital money. We got some windfall. The economy was good that year. We got some big tax bonds. We overbuilt a bunch of infrastructure, but then we had no OpEx, sinking fund to replace it over time. And so it aged, and then there was some other big thing that came in. So then we all rushed to the cloud because, well, it's better just to have everything in an operating model. Then we started getting questions about, well, your maintenance used to be $100,000 a year, now it's $1 million a year. Yeah, but it's not apples and oranges. Now I've got DR and, security that I didn't have before. So then you have to get into all those conversations. And then, you do have to think about disentanglement. Sometimes it's almost too easy to get into the cloud. And then at some point something changes, the price point changes or the regulation changes, and you've got to get out of it. And if you haven't thought about your exit strategy, that can be an issue. And I won't, I'm not here to name names of vendors, but we made some decisions in a couple of my jobs where we decided to go with a certain vendor for email services. And I got a lot of questions about, well, why'd you go with that one vendor when there's all this buzz about this other vendor for email? And I said, well, it was disentanglement. I said, we're going to try this. I think it makes sense to us. I think it'll work. But I can tell you how we'll get out of it if we go with this one vendor. I can make a copy of this file. I can run the infrastructure internally. I've got people trained. If we go with this other vendor, we're locked in. There's really no easy exit strategy. It's going to cost us as much to get out of that as it was to get into it, and we don't have a plan for that. So I think in local government, as a CIO or as an IT leader, you have to think of all those elements. Your end users aren't really going to care, frankly, where you're running your workloads. You know, as long as it shows good value, it's got good performance, you know, it's all invisible to them, right? You know, they don't care if I'm running Cisco switches or HP switches or Dell servers. They don't care. They just want access to their information. They want it on their mobile devices. They want it to be fast. They want it to be secure. They want to be able to recover from it. So it's really up to you to think through what are all those ancillary things you need to take in consideration on their behalf to protect their data, to integrate their data, to provide their data to them in a safe and secure way. And the application is just a way to do that. So I think developing the strategy first before you say you can do something in the cloud is critical.
So John, coming back to you, what is the agency or county's top Cal Cloud initiatives? Obviously, hopefully that includes Cal Cloud in California. Right? No one laughed. It was a joke. Well, actually it wasn't.
You know, for us, and I only joined the county 3 years ago. Like I said, on one hand, I was fortunate. You know, previously in my CIO jobs, I felt like I was dragging people to the cloud. When I joined San Mateo, there's already sort of this push. You know, they were ready to sign the deal with Workday. Actually, I found myself in a position where I was like, hey, you know, we need to come up with a strategy first. That's what we didn't have. We were just like, we can do this. We can put our ERP in the cloud. We can put our email in the cloud. We can put our case management system for the DA in the cloud. Like, yeah, we can do all that, but, you know, do we want to do that? Does that make sense? And so I think, you know, we have done a lot of those things. I would say for a small county, I'm proud of the staff and our business leaders that have made some of those decisions. But I think, you know, our top priority really is still continuing to refine that strategy. I think that's an evolving thing that we're looking at. As a matter of fact, we're reorganizing the department right now with a big focus on strategy and planning, because we still look at the cloud as a solution to a single point problem. Like, we need to do something about email. We were on GroupWise when I joined the county. I thought it was like some joke. I logged into my computer first day in San Mateo, and I'm like, ha, 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 GroupWise. That's great, guys, really funny. And they're like, no, that's our email system. I was like, oh, okay. You know, I thought it was like some candid camera show or something. Let's punk the new CIO and make him have GroupWise on his computer. But
You still on that platform? Or
no,
you're off?
we're on,
Okay.
yeah.
Just making sure.
A little plug for Microsoft. We're on Office 365 now. Works great. We love it. But I think that's our number one priority now. We've done a lot of cloud applications, and we're going to continue to do that. But what we've realized through our governance process and our long-term financial planning process is we need to refine our strategy. So I think the end solutions will continue to evolve as to what solutions we pick, but they've really got to dovetail with the long-term financial and business strategy for all the business users in our county. So that's really our top priority right now, is refining that strategy.
Great. So Chris, again, what about from the industry perspective, and how are you looking to address Commvault's maturity and how it interacts with cloud platforms and solutions?
A couple of one point to come off of John's. Very wise CIO that I know works in the state and local government. He said, so I asked him, how do you choose, right? How do you figure it out? And he had a very simple. He goes up on the board and draws a 4-quadrant matrix. And in the upper right is really important applications to our constituency. And in the lower left is low-value stuff, commodity stuff. And on the other axis, he said, this is stuff we're really good at, and up high is stuff that we're not really good at. And by laying out those applications, it becomes really clear as to what are low-value commodity applications that you may or may not be good at. And his point was, if there's a low-value application that we're really good at, let's redeploy those sources, give it to somebody like a cloud, an O365, where it's a commodity, and redeploy those things where we're hitting a higher value. But to get to your point is that one of the things we've had to make a huge change, and we've invested about 2.5 years ago, is to come to the realization that as people move to a Workday, an O365, a public cloud, maybe a dedicated private cloud or a hybrid cloud environment, we had to be able to move our intelligence to where the data lived. Because the old paradigm of everything's in the data center, and therefore we can move data around and index it and use the leverage of a centralized data center was quickly breaking down. So we had to be able to move our intelligence to where the data resided without having to move the data, because it's either very expensive or virtually impossible given the time frames, network bandwidth, et cetera.
Tim, what about you in terms of your cloud initiatives at Water Resources and Natural Resources Agency and Department?
Yeah, we have quite a few we're looking at, but as I go through them, I want to kind of tell you the business reason behind them. Because moving to the cloud for the sake of just having a technology hybrid solution is not going to deliver value to your business. So one of the areas is app dev, where we develop applications, our non-production. We're really looking at moving all of that into probably multiple cloud sources, Cal Cloud, Azure, things like that. The reason why? Deliver time to market. To lower our cost around our development of solutions and delivery of solutions. So, time to market is very important. And one of the ways to reduce time to market is give our development and solution teams more flexibility, self-provisioning. We do that on our internal cloud, but quite frankly, I bet most of you in government, your non-production environment costs more than your production environment. Go back and look at your cost points. I guarantee you, you're probably spending more on non-production infrastructure than you're spending on production. Yeah. So that's one of the reasons, app dev. Backup and recovery. We have over 11 petabytes of active data in the resource agency. So we need a more cost-effective way of looking at archiving and backing up and other solutions. So we're really looking at cloud solutions around backup and recovery and archiving. But it's much like Chris said, what's the cost of getting that back? Backing up is one thing. Recovery is really where you want the value-added proposition. Another area we're really looking at is in business applications. We call them productivity applications, Office 365. We're not in the Word and Excel business. And why are we doing that? Is it because, one, it's going to reduce some of our operational costs, but more importantly, it's going to create extendability and flexibility for our end users, mobile users, home users, OneDrive, collaboration. This gives them access to things they're using now behind your back, such as Drop Drive and Box and others. So, this allows us to provide what they need, but in a secure, flexible fashion. So those are some of them. We have some other endeavors we're doing where we're mixing our on-prem private cloud, and we're working with Chris and others about how we can move workloads between Cal Cloud and our cloud, and also a third-party cloud. So this is really exciting time.
So Tim, just to expand upon that, talk to us about some of the business drivers within your agency and how you're aligning that with these IT initiatives with cloud specifically.
Well, like I said, right now, the business needs far outweigh our ability to deliver. We do not have the resources, whether they're physical resources or they're people resources. And in order for the business to be really self-contained and allow them to consumerize IT services, we need to move those services sometimes into the cloud. It's easier for them to then consumerize them there than it is on our on-prem. So one of the business drivers is really extending the capabilities for the business and giving them more capacity at a reduced cost. So there's no one answer. I don't think everything should go in the cloud. I don't think everything should be on-prem. I do think that you really have to have what is your value points and what are your factors, and not any two organizations are going to have those same type of value points. I think you have to look and understand your own business.
So you think in California it would be beneficial, really any entity, that maybe they do an assessment first and look at their inventory of their applications to see what are good candidates for cloud and what are good candidates for other services?
Yes, I think the assessment, I think most IT shops, quite frankly, internal shops really don't even understand the information they're supporting. Do you really understand how that information has value to your business? By SAM, and we're supposed to classify all of our data, right? How many of you classify your unstructured data? You probably classify your databases, but 80% of your analytical information, studies and so forth, are in unstructured data. So, you have to understand the complete picture of that. So I think we have to do a better job in IT of understanding what we support and how that is used by the business.
Thank you. So Chris, obviously Commvault's a publicly traded company. Talk to us about business drivers that obviously drive your level of maturity into the cloud in your service offering.
So, yeah, so interesting, you know, we were touching on it. One of the things that, you know, I've seen a lot of people in terms of how they develop and classify information and move to the cloud is, one, understanding the profile of the workload. And so the idea that, okay, if you have a seasonal workload that has a seasonal burst, that might be an ideal type of application to move in the cloud where it can expand resources dynamically as demand and, you know, tax April 15th, right? It's being hammered, talking to, you know, the state of Colorado, their electronic sales tax application, end of the quarter, end of the month, huge demand on it. But on February 2nd, it's running at 4% of its capacity. So understanding that. But also in terms of proximity, and what I'd like to understand is as you move workloads, remember that there needs to be proximity to the data so that you don't want to have long distance connections between data sources and applications and connections, because that'll introduce latency and a lot of cost, but also connections to secondary copies and archives and all of that, because as you migrate and move applications around, and maybe it's running in a hybrid cloud, maybe it's running in a more managed environment, the connection between those two things can get lost very easily, and it becomes really difficult to manage that information. And then to Tim's point, then you run into this huge secondary non-production infrastructure that you're kind of building on that's consuming a huge amount of resources. So you want to be cognizant of that.
Yeah.
Hey, Chris, I just wanted to add, Chris. I just wanted to add something that Chris said is, we never think about scaling down.
Yeah.
I mean, we architect infrastructure and platforms always about scaling up. But the reality is you really need to be able to scale down, and that's really where some of this hybrid cloud can really help you manage your cost, and that's important, the ability to scale down as much as scale up.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, too, in our environment. So as you do assessments and look at what you want to do with your current environment and look at a gap analysis and figure out what your as-is is, and to get to that to-be state, that's something you also need to take into consideration in that evaluation. I think those are great points. So, John, really, in terms of your area, again, at the county level, looking at business drivers, obviously, you guys provision services right at the constituent level. So what are some of those business drivers where you see cloud services coming in to expedite those services to your citizens?
Well, I think, you know, Tim made a good point. I think it's speed of delivery. I think, you know, the challenge in the evolution of government, ITIC, and local government is, you know, a lot of times we're still stuck in the mindset. And I have these meetings all the time with my staff who are very well-meaning, and I am too, because I go into these meetings with the same mindset, where a customer will present a problem, and we immediately say, well, how can we solve the problem, right? So we go into these brainstorming sessions, well, we can write that application, we can do this. And so, because we evolved, some of us, you know, 20 or 30 years doing this job, you know, we started out, and I always tell the story back in my first deputy job in San Jose, we used to build our own computers, right? We were like, okay, we're going to pick this chipset and this motherboard, and yeah, I had 13 staff. That's all they did. They sat in a room and they assembled computers, because that's before, you know, computers were really a commodity that you could buy. And then suddenly Dell came along one day, and we had to ask ourselves, well, does this really value add to the end user? You know, is having 13 people sit in a room and buy component parts and assemble computers, does that add value to my customer, or is that just a time lag where I could just go to the Dell website and order, you know, 100 computers there, we're done, drop ship them, right? And I think there's still some of that lag when you talk about cloud and the evolution to it is, you know, the end users, the business users have problems that they're trying to solve from a business aspect. And we come into it thinking, well, here's how I would solve it. And a lot of that sometimes is just a lag in what we can do, you know, because I still have staff tell me this all the time, I can do this, I can do that. I'm like, yeah, but does it add value? Sure, you know. I could assemble my own car, but I could also go to a dealership and buy one. You know, just because I can do something doesn't mean it adds value for me to do that. And so I think that's what we're still working through as an organization and local government. So we've tried to retrain ourselves to say, okay, here's how we would do it, and go through that process quickly so we don't get into this analysis. Well, we'll get back in 6 months about how we would build it. We say, okay, here's just some general ideas how we would do it, but here are these other options. You know, whether it's a infrastructure on-prem solution or a hosted solution or a cloud solution, here's these other options, and then sit down with a business user and say, okay, is cost your biggest driver? Are regulations your biggest driver? Is time to market? You know, do you need this solution in a month? Because we might be able to do it ourselves and do it cheaper, but if you need it next month, we're going to have to employ this other strategy. But I just, I want to tag on to something Tim said. One of the lessons for me, and I know you probably all think every decision I make is right and I never make a mistake, which, it's what I tell everybody. But
Oh, you're not perfect?
yeah.
Oh, darn.
Despite all the marketing. The reality of it is, you build these infrastructures, right? Hybrid or on-prem infrastructures thinking, well, here's what I'm going to do, right? Here's my idea, and here's how we're going to do it, and here's how we're going to add value to the customers and costs. And surprisingly, sometimes you make the wrong decision, right? And I keep telling my staff, if I was batting 500 in the big leagues, I'd be a superstar. Why is it you criticize me all the time when half my decisions are wrong? I mean, I just don't get it, But we built this whole infrastructure because we were going to do this on-prem solution, right? And we built it, and we ran it for about a year, and we had some real issues. And it was a real wake-up call to me where I was like, you know what? I just spent like $1.4 million on this infrastructure, and this isn't going to work. This is a failure. I'm going to have to own it. And we were fortunate in this case. And I'd like to say this was, I had thought ahead that I was going to have to reuse this infrastructure somehow, but I have to admit, we just got lucky. That we did find a way to repurpose that infrastructure. But if we hadn't, we'd have wasted $1.4 million of public funds for a failed internal solutions that ended up going to the cloud anyhow, even though we thought it would be faster, better, cheaper to do it internally. And we were just
John, we
fortunate.
would have hired you as a computer operator.
Oh, good, yeah. A project manager?
So John, you bring up an interesting point. You talked about the need, and really it centers around governance, right? And having an IT governance structure in place. So I'm interested in getting feedback from the panel on the importance of governance in terms of defining a framework within your organization to make these types of decisions moving forward. So any feedback from any one of you on governance, the importance of it, if you've done it?
I'll touch on governance. The one point I do want to make is that in my travels across the United States as well as internationally, I see a huge opportunity for state and local cooperation that I think is being missed. If you think about some core IT services, why should the state of California have 42 file share services or those kinds of basic services? And I see some real advantages in terms of where states are cooperating between states, as well as state and local partnerships to deliver kinds of things. Now, of course, funding and all of those things come into play about how much you can do that. But, a great example is in the state of Florida where local counties are cooperating, where they're going to say, we're really good at this, and you've got a really great real estate tax system, so we'll leverage yours and you leverage ours, and then, oh, by the way, the state cloud infrastructure will run it for both of us. And so the idea of partnerships, I think, is something that's perhaps not taken advantage enough. And that then goes into governance, because in governance now you've got every entity doing their own governance. And I think that, one, there's a lot of waste because you're repeating the same things over and over again. One organization is trying to do the same thing another organization is. So by centralizing, you can get better standards of governance, more consistent governance, rather than kind of everybody kind of mixing their own cake, So sometimes that'll do that. So from that perspective, I think cooperation, standardization leads to better governance, more efficient governance, and more consistent governance.
John, Tim, anything to add to that?
I think IT governance has to add value, though. I think a lot of times when you talk to the business folks, especially about IT governance, or even some of your own people within IT, they look at it as, oh, here's just another layer that I got to go through to get what I need, or I have to go through it to get permission. So you really have to construct IT governance as a value-added proposition. And you have to look at what fits for your organization and what are the decision-making models. But you have to have it. I mean, without it, it's chaos, and your costs are going to go up, and your services delivery is going to go down because it's not going to be coordinated. You're not going to get benefits of where you can consolidate or where you can federate, where somebody else has already done this and you're not aware of it. You're going to be redoing things more than once, which is costly to both your constituents and your internal business. So I think it's a necessary evil, as I call it, but you have to construct it where it's part of the fabric of your business decision-making process. It cannot just be looked at as another IT stopgap. So it's important. You need it, and I think in hybrid, you really need it because can you classify the data on your own? Do you know the business value of the data? Do you understand what are more important services to your business? Do your IT folks? As a CIO, I don't know that, and my people don't know that, so you have to have IT governance to bring that thought process in and bring it in front of the business and let them make those help make those decisions of where you place that workload.
Right. So, gentlemen, I'm curious about what about lessons learned? John, talk to us about some of the lessons learned that you've experienced with cloud initiatives in your county.
I got to tell another story about one of my failures? I mean, come on. Somebody, I can't be the only one that made
We're being
a mistake.
transparent.
John, you're so good at it.
That's true. I just, because this is supposed to be about data, and sometimes I feel like I talk too much about just cloud in general, so I want to bring it back to data for a minute. I'll give an example of something that I think is an emerging, hopefully it's going to be a success, but there's always that risk of failure when you try something new, and I think that's one of the things that holds us back a lot of times as organizations is fear of failure. Obviously, I'm not afraid of that. I think one of the things we're doing in our county that's interesting is we talk about going to the cloud. There's so many aspects of that, and data is so integral to why you would want to do that. We're a big geographic county, relatively speaking. We have 20 smaller cities, but of all equal importance to us. And we have an opportunity in our county that we're wrapping up a project now where on about half of those cities we have some old fiber that's in the ground that was a holder from the old cable franchise days that we've decided to reuse, and what we're going to do is put a high-speed hub, fiber hub, dark fiber hub into every city. And I was just at a board meeting yesterday before I drove up here, and they were talking about governance and data and things like that. And it's interesting, these are business leaders, not necessarily techies, right? And they were saying, well, first of all, why do we need fiber? Well, who cares? We have a high-speed fiber hub in our city. And I said, well, we talked about all the business drivers. Well, you want to do cloud and you want to do disaster readiness and things. You need to be able to connect to that cloud. And right now, you all as individual small cities can't afford the pipe you would need to do that effectively. So that's one reason. But then it turned to data quickly, and it was interesting. So first, nobody wanted governance, right? Everyone's like, governance boards and JPAs and can't we just all shake hands and, do dark fiber and be done with it? Because, in my county, we're just doers, right? And we all get along great, we all go out and have dinner together and stuff. But I had to, bring it back to, well, your data in your city, your public safety data, or your financial data, we need to be careful, and we need a board that talks about we want to share data, but at the same time, this governance model and these technologies we put in place has to transcend the individuals. And so my shaking some, city manager's hand to say, no problem, sir, we'll give you dark fiber. We need these governance models and these strategies and these technologies to transcend the systems we put into place so that in the future, when people ask, well, when I transmit my NICRIC data from South San Francisco to Redwood City about some, cybersecurity thing, is it secure, is it safe? And then if I want to replicate that out to some cloud solution, is everybody comfortable? So you got to look at, the HIPAA rules, the PCI rules, you got to look at the CLETS and CGI rules, and you got to go through all those different business use cases. You need to, back to Tim's point, classify your data. You got to look at your transport mechanisms. Are they set up to support the data integrity and security? And so I think, I'm hopeful it's going to be a success. I've got my fingers crossed, that we're able to do this. And it is a shared services in the sense we'll all be sharing the fiber, but I'm not providing the service. I'm not saying I'm the solution to all the city's problems. I don't have some magical applications I can provide to them to solve their problems, but I can provide that middle mile transport to them to hopefully reach some of those solutions. But we've got to have those conversations and those strategies and those governance bodies in place to do that effectively over time.
So I think Miguel Gamino hit the nail on the head earlier in our keynote about talking about the state's infrastructure. And I think you're right on in terms of aligning that with broadband. We need to work together to ensure that we have an infrastructure that can support everybody, that we're addressing effectively the digital divide. And I think that's really, really key. So Chris, from one Chris to another, talk to us about lessons learned with Commvault, not only working in California, but maybe other states that you've gleaned from this
Sure.
experience.
I've seen tremendous successes as well as, I wouldn't say technical failures, but the lack of understanding of exactly what people are trying to do and how that translates into these kinds of things. So California company, commercial company, decides they want to back up to the cloud. That's what they want to do. We're going to put our backups there, and then we're going to put together a DR strategy with that, and we are going to save a ton of money. They were using an Iron Mountain kind of sun guard approach, $3 million, costs go down to $60,000. The problem was that they neglected to figure out what their retention strategy was on all of their backups. So they had originally budgeted $60,000 a month to store their data. Well, because of their infinite retention problem, that $60,000 ballooned to $600,000 a month because of data transport charges and data retention charges.
What state is that?
It's a commercial company.
Yeah, okay.
Needless to say, the team that delivered that got a little bit of a reprimand. But the interesting part was that after a little bit of work with them and some technical integration, we were able to kind of unravel some of the, what I'll call the assumptions. So going into a project with assumptions on what's going to happen is that. The other stories are, again, an off-ramp, not so much an issue today, but at least in the last 5 years, I'm going to predict that you're probably going to be choosing between 3 and 5 global, commercial, public cloud providers. And that consolidation will happen simply because those small guys just can't keep up with them from the deep pockets. But some of our customers got information, got a notice that this cloud provider was going to go out of business in 2 weeks. Come and get your data. We're shutting down. And so we had to work with them to move hundreds of terabytes of data out of that cloud within 2 weeks. So kind of those kinds, you don't want to be surprised. So, make those choices wisely, understand what you're doing, and move in that direction.
So if you gentlemen had to look in a crystal ball, which I have right here, what would you predict in terms of cloud moving forward? Where do you see cloud evolving, and how your organizations address cloud initiatives moving forward, and how do you participate?
If we're looking 5 years to a decade out, I think the concept of large government data centers or operational centers is going to shrink. I think you're going to focus on those things, those core enterprise things that you just have to have total control of. And I think then some of these other types of services and informational stacks that you're currently keeping a tight hold on, you're going to push out. And you're going to allow that to be in either a private cloud or a public cloud, depending on some of the compliancy needs and the type of consumerization of those. I do believe that you have to embrace this, and then you have to plan for it and build a strategy around it. And part of that strategy is bringing your business stakeholders in and working through those details with them. And I'm not talking about the technical architecture. That's there today. We can do that today. We're doing that in the agency today. We have a hybrid cloud. We're in multiple clouds, but we're not effectively optimizing it because we're still not totally sure about where the business wants to go and how do they use it, but more importantly, how do their consumers, so our program areas deliver service to other local agencies, water agencies, energy commissions, and the public citizens. So how do they have to get to this information? So I think it's going to be important to bridge that gap. The technology gap, I'm not worried about. That's there today. We can do this today. A lot of people are already doing it. We're doing it internally with a private cloud of 33 organizations operating out of our shared services, but that's not enough. We need to extend that out. So I think, Chris, you and your team and others are thinking about that, and I think that we've got to continue to collaborate on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, great. Chris?
Yeah, I'm going to take a little different approach, and I agree with what Tim was saying. And if you were to ask me in 5 years, what's the typical profile, it's going to be 60% in cloud, and I'll put that in quotes, whether that's SaaS-based or managed or whatever, and 40% on-premise, round figures. But I think the cloud is an enabling capability to bring IT information and capabilities to the constituency. So what I think cloud is going to allow state and local government to do is deliver more personalized services to their constituencies, because the capabilities are closer to the constituents. And for that piece, I think and we were talking about this, security, governance, rights, and as more data gets accessible by more people, there's more opportunity for breaches, for IP losses, for embarrassment, and that's one of the things that as organizations, we're kind of in this tug of war, which is we want to give people more access to more information, make them more self-service, give them more so they can do more, but how do we do that in a way that's secure? So, and cloud is just one of the tools that is driving this kind of very different paradigm between, IT and the consumer in terms of that.
So really moving to more of a centralized model for infrastructure is probably more of a recommendation depending on criticality.
Well,
data.
I see a need for a more centralized approach to access management, identity management, fraud detection. So if I sign in and I'm Chris Van Wagner and I want to go get a driver's license, how do I prove I'm who I am, right? And how do I do that in a consistent manner? Or even if I'm trying to help people by sharing information, what's proprietary? What can I share? How do I, today on a mobile app today, you can practically do pretty much anything capability-wise, but how do you do that in a way that's secure, safe, and those kinds of things? And I think cloud is just a technology underpinning that's enabling a real transformation in terms of how state and local government interacts with its constituency.
Exactly. So really, anything in terms of parting advice the panel could give to the audience out here in terms of best practices or how we want to move forward, or anything that we should take in terms of nuggets of information when we walk out the door?
Just two quick things from me. One, have a strategy when you go in. I mean, I would say to all of you that it's possible to do pretty much almost anything in the cloud, but you really need a strategy about why you're doing it in the cloud. And secondarily, if you're part of the IT organization, what is your value add to that strategy? And I think it's different for every organization, depending on the organization you're part of. Are you focused on the connectivity conversation, the security conversation? If you're 100% into the cloud, are you going to be the vendor manager expert? But figure out where you fit as an IT organization and where you add the most value to your organization currently and in the future, where you're going, and position yourself there.
I would echo what John said, is that there's no one strategy that fits all of you, but there are three elements that every strategy should look at. And when you're talking about hybrid cloud or workload placement: capacity, capabilities, and consumerization. Because that's what the business needs. Technology, capabilities, and capacities to move, and then the ability to consume that at their will from anywhere, anytime. So I would recommend, if you focus on those three things as your strategy, you should be okay.
My little comment will be that in 99% of the cases, moving to the cloud, adopting whatever you want, a hybrid cloud, whatever, doesn't alleviate you as an IT organization, as a data custodian, your core responsibilities. Those responsibilities that you kind of know and understand in terms of your current day-to-day thing don't change. What you've changed is, and I like to call the cloud just somebody else's computer who's running it. Those responsibilities, the custodianship, the data management, all of those things don't change. And so people think of the cloud as, well, I don't have to do this stuff anymore. Not really. You still need to think about those kinds of key capabilities. So just moving to the cloud isn't just handing it to somebody. It's not somebody else's problem 100%. Yeah, they've alleviated some of your capabilities, but it doesn't change those core responsibilities you have.
Great. All right, well, we wanted to allow a few minutes for questions and answers from the audience. Are there any questions out there for our esteemed panel members that you would like to ask? No questions? Wow. Anything else? Going once? Going twice? All right. Well, again, I wanted to thank this great panel for your advice, for your information, for your input. Hopefully, you solicited a lot of lessons learned and best practices coming out of this event today. And we thank you very much and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And again, thanks to the panel. Let's give them a great hand. All right. Thank you.